Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Okay, so this episode actually kind of fleshes out the mystery behind the Planet Disc. We kind of sort of get a name drop. They've talked about it before, but the kids didn't know what it was called. So yeah, we kind of find out a little bit more about the Planet Disc and why Fred Jones is Fred Jones Sr. specifically, why Fred Jones Sr. is kind of seemingly looking into it. We also there's a really interesting thing where the main villain is just trying to haunt Mayor Jones and try to figure out and Mayor Jones is just kind of freaking out because of his house, because he thinks his house is haunted. And sure enough, the episode kind of opens up with that exact premise. It opens up with both of the Joneses sleeping in their house. Or rather, Fred's sleeping. He's curled up with a magazine of Traps Illustrated, which is just a magazine. It's been a recurring bit, but it's a magazine they subscribe to. And he's curled up with it while dreaming about Daphne and Traps. But which is kind of fitting considering what that's basically his whole character. But meanwhile, Mayor Jones is in his own master bedroom, and he's actually studying the piece of this Planet Spirit disc, which is revealed that he actually has a piece. It's revealed in this episode that he actually has a piece of the disc, and notably a different piece than which kind of explains why he's been looking into it, and we've established that he knows Mr. Ink has a piece of this Planet Spirit disc. So the fact that he's looking, so now that kind of confirms that is indeed what he's doing. He's trying to find other pieces of the Planet Spirit disc, and of course he eventually decides to actually turn in for bed, and it reveals that he actually has a stuffed lion head with a safe behind it above his bed. And that he then opens it up, puts in the combo to a safe, then sticks the Planet Spirit disc inside to keep it safe, and closes it up, and then proceeds to go to bed. But while he's actually getting ready to settle in for bed, he suddenly hears a loud cackling, and after panicking a little bit, suddenly things start flying around the room and start flying around his bedroom, and he immediately begins panicking because now there's things inside his house. There's just and he remarks that it's happened again, implying that it has indeed happened before. And sure enough, he actually is approached by a shadowy figure who we don't actually get to see very clearly. I should mention we don't get to see what it looks like until the very end of the episode, but this ghost, the shadowy figure, actually approaches him, and I should admit its voice is garbled, and on top of that, Fred Sr. was talking over it, so I don't really know what the ghost was actually saying in this scene. I should mention it's very hard to make out for a number of reasons, but in any case, I'm pretty sure the ghost tells him to give him back what it stole from him, and with Fred Sr. merely panicking and immediately running out of the house, and Fred Jr. actually hears all of this from his room, and realizing something's wrong with his dad, he immediately runs out to go and meet up with him, and immediately runs face first into him, and of course when Fred Jr. asks what's going on, Fred Sr. merely points out that he doesn't really that there's no time for that, and that they just need to get out of the house as quickly as possible. And sure enough, he immediately runs out of the house. Whereas Fred Jr. looks in the direction of his dad's bedroom and sees a shadowy figure hiding behind the door and closing the door. And Fred becomes kind of worried about his dad's well-being. And then the next day at school, Fred then proceeds to bring this up to the rest of Mystery Inc., pointing out that his dad has been having problems for the past two. Apparently, this has been going on for weeks. But apparently, Fred has been pointing out that there's been something going on in the house, and points out that his dad has been running out of the house screaming, and then proceeds to sleep on the lawn, which he wonders if is normal, and it's actually, and Velma points out that since it's Fred Sr., probably. But of course, the gang immediately just again, of course, Daphne then reassures them that's probably nothing, pointing out that they had a similar situation with Nan. Apparently Nan Blake had a similar situation where she kind of freaked out and ran out in the lawn, and the men who eventually took her away during that whole episode eventually discovered that she just had a bit too much spicy food, which caused her to. You know where it's going, but I'm not gonna say it. But and of course Shaggy immediately chimes in, pointing out that that is exactly the kind of situation he has when eating too much spicy food. But Scooby comically cuts him off before he can get too graphic. But in any case with that, Shaggy and Scooby then volunteer to actually sleep over at Fred's house for the time being, because they quickly realize that Fred is very worried about his dad, and point out that if they need him to be there, they'll happily be there. And of course Daphne and Velma immediately chime in, pointing out that with Velma pointing out that of course her mom knows about a whole bunch of herbal remedies that could help him get better sleep, and points out that they could very easily research some stuff that way and trying to figure some stuff out so that he can get a better night's sleep. And Fred, very happy about the fact that his friends have all decided to chime in and help, and then just pitch in and make sure his dad is okay, thanks them, and then proceeds to go off to class, but with the rest of the gang just kind of parting ways after that. At which point Daphne actually stops Velma in the hall, stops Velma before she can leave, and asks her if she's ever had any sort of secrets and other sorts of issues, and of course Velma immediately points out that not so recently, when she was dating Shaggy, he left her for a dog, then tried to come back to her almost shortly sometime after. And of course she very much put him in his place. So she points out that yeah, she had a bit of issues with her relationship. And of course it's at this point where Daphne actually points out that Fred has apparently gotten a lot more obsessive. To the point, and points out that he's actually been to the point that he's actually been cataloging her entire schedule and figuring out what she does and when. And case in point, she proceeds to open his locker and a huge list of all the things that she does during her day-to-day life just spills out. And she points out that that's only for morning. And she's very worried that Fred is becoming a little bit too clingy, and wonders if she's going to be able to deal with his control issues. So yeah, it's established that Fred has a bit of a control issue, and of course he is a very obsessive kind of person. It makes perfect sense that he would do something like this. He's very obsessive about the things he cares about. Namely, his main character trait throughout this entire series so far has been traps, and later Daphne. So, yeah, he's very much an obsessive person when it comes to things he cares about. So it naturally makes sense that he would create a massive list of all the things Daphne does during her day-to-day life. But not that it's not creepy, it is a little bit. But yeah, it is entirely within Fred's character to do this. It makes perfect sense. But in any case with that, Fred, Daphne, and Velma then proceed to go to the Broken Spine, where they ask Angie Dinkley for some remedies, and of course Mrs. Dinkley is more than happy to help, and proceeds to pull out a couple of remedies, pointing out that she very much feels she feels like these would actually hit the spot and would actually be able to help Mayor Jones sleep a little bit better. But it's at this point where they hear a voice telling them that the herbal tea that she's prepared isn't going to do much good, and what they're going to need is a spiritual cleansing. At which point a strange gypsy woman actually walks out from behind one of the bookshelves, and everybody's immediately creeped out by her except Mrs. Dinkley, who apparently reveals that she's the new barista at the Broken Spine, and that her name is actually Lady Marmalade, which I should mention is spelled marmalade, but they mispronounce it on purpose to make her seem like, well, foreign. But in case Fred asks Lady Marmalade actually elaborate a little bit more, and she points out that in addition to being a barista, she also dabbles in voodoo and a couple of other spiritual practices, and points out that there's a very good chance that Fred Sr. may have an evil spirit lingering on him, and also gets a read off of Fred that points out that his spirit may be in need of a good washing. So, when Daphne and Velma point out that they would just like the tea for now, she apologizes for interrupting, but also points out that she'll be by the milk machine if they need her, and then proceeds to actually go off in a rather creepy manner, I should mention. She just kind of slides backward a little bit behind the bookshelf where she hid, and of course Mrs. Dinkley is completely oblivious to the fact that she's a little bit creepy, pointing out that she's a bit of a delight, and also points out that she's very much a sucker for her accent, which of course is fair. She has a very interesting accent, but in any case, now that they're back now that they have the herbal tea in hand, Fred, Shaggy, and Scooby then proceed to set up for the night with Fred and Shaggy actually setting up the couch so that Shaggy can sleep on it, and while they're doing that, Fred actually winds up thanking Shaggy and Scooby again for volunteering to sleep over, and of course they point out that it's no problem, because even though they admittedly are cowards, they do stand by their friends and are more than happy to spend the night with him, and of course if they need him, that they'll happily be there. And of course while they're actually setting up, the blanket accidentally knocks a picture off of the bookshelf, which Scooby manages to catch off from his tail with his tail, and remarks that it's a very pretty that whoever the woman in the picture is, she's very hot, but which is interesting considering it's coming from Scooby. But in any case, Shaggy immediately scoops the picture up and tells Scooby to be polite, pointing out that that's apparently Fred's mother. And Fred kind of finishes the sentence that Shaggy was starting on, but the two of them admit that they haven't seen her in years, and that she actually wound up disappearing when Fred was a baby, and that's a little bit of an interesting thing where but Fred does ultimately admit that Scooby is very much right, and that she is beautiful, and that he hopes one day she'll come back and he'll be able to say that she's beautiful to her face. So, and with that, he then proceeds to put the picture back in its usual spot, and the group then proceeds to kind of retire and go to bed. Fred goes up to his room, whereas Shaggy and Scooby just kind of chill out, watching a Vincent Van Gogh movie on the couch and eating food before bed. And the Vincent Van Gogh movie it's actually an extended thing where we actually see the Vincent Van Gogh movie, and it's another zombie movie, but this time Vincent Van Gogh is playing a doctor in a hospital, and he's fighting off zombies with a stethoscope. It is glorious. I love it. But in case with that, they then proceed to turn off the movie and admit that they were kind of full, and admit that they couldn't eat another bite, and but then decide to actually go into the kitchen and make a pizza anyway. And of course, it's at this point, and of course, they immediately start making they quickly start making the pizza. Whereas Fred is sleeping on his bed when he hears his dad screaming, and immediately runs in to discover that there's just a tornado of stuff just flying around Fred Sr.'s room. So of course Fred Sr. is very panicked, and he's also stuck on the ceiling. So Fred asks his dad to hang on to something, and then immediately hollers to Shaggy and Scooby to come out and come help. And Shaggy and Scooby do immediately hear him and immediately try to come to help, but then the door winds up slamming in their face, and they're unable to escape the kitchen. And then to make matters worse, the pizza that they were working on, the pizza that they were actually making as a midnight snack before bed, winds up coming to life and tries to attack them, and proclaims that it's an evil pizza and that it's going to eat them. And of course, they immediately try to run away from it. And throughout the whole ordeal, Shaggy admits that the fact that the pizza is alive is very wrong. And you do eventually manage to succeed to evade it somewhat, where they hide under the cabinet. It eventually does find. They hide in the cabinet. It eventually finds them, but they do run out and run out into the main floor to try and go help Fred, but who at this point has offered his dad a golf club and asked him to hang on to it, and they're kind of just flung around the house a little bit. And of course, it immediately becomes problematic, and quickly realizing that they need to actually get out of the house as soon as possible. Both Freds as well as Shaggy and Scooby immediately run out the main entrance and flee as fast as possible, with the shadowy figure actually slamming the door behind him and cackling from Fred Senior's room. And it's at this point where Fred Sr. decides he's had enough, and after packing up several of his things, including clothes, he then decides that he's not going to go back to the house, and he's just going to stay in his office. He's not going to leave the town hall anytime soon. But of course, Fred points out that that's actually preposterous, and that they need to solve he actually needs to solve the mystery, and points out that Fred Sr. knows he can do it, and that he could actually solve the mystery. But of course, Fred Sr. admits that he's not having any of it, and also pointing out that if Fred Jr. just wants to run into the house and go mad trying to fight a ghost, that he's welcome to be his guest. And also, apparently, asks him to go and find him some more socks and clothes while he's there, because he wasn't able to grab everything. And also points out that he hopes Fred can actually help him figure out why there's so many sunflower seeds scattered around the house. Pointing out that he's been finding them all over the house for the past couple of weeks. And sure enough, he dumps several of them out of his sock, with Fred remarking that it is indeed very strange. Meanwhile, Shaggy and Scooby are kind of confused about how they're actually supposed to proceed and go back to eating, because as they pointed out in their little endeavor last night, the pizza food has finally turned on them, and they don't know how to deal with it. And of course, Velma reassures them, pointing out that they'll probably eat again within the next 10 minutes, and they'll probably be fine. But of course, it's this point where Fred Jr. actually points out that they need to figure out how to actually solve the mystery regarding what's going on at Jones Manor. And of course, he points out that he's going to need his dad's help. But by this point, his dad is completely tucked himself in and is comfortable, and is outright refusing to go back to the house. But of course, he reassures Fred Sr. that he is indeed going to solve the mystery, but also proceeds to make a bet with him, pointing out that if he can't solve the mystery, he'll give up mystery solving. Which of course Daphne immediately points out he shouldn't be doing. But Fred Sr. immediately takes him up on the offer, pointing out that now he has witnesses and there's no takesies backsies at this point. So the bet is kind of just locked in now. But in case with that, Fred Jr. then proceeds to come to the house with a series of CCTV cameras. Although he openly admits he doesn't know how to set any of them up, since of course he openly admits he's a trap guy and doesn't know anything about this kind of stuff. But Velma actually points out that she has apparently been doing stuff like this since she was a baby, or at least since she could walk. So she admits that she's probably the best person for the job, and tells it to leave it to her. And sure enough, the group then proceeds to go into a montage where they actually wind up setting up all of the cameras around the house. And also during this sequence, Fred Sr. looks cautiously toward his safe. But in case they do eventually get the entire system up and running, at which point they immediately call in. Fred admits that he has one last thing that they need to do to actually guarantee that there actually isn't to actually make sure that the evil spirit doesn't come back and try to attack them. And sure enough, he immediately calls in Lady Marmalade, who the group is very confused to see, but Lady Marmalade points out that she's actually the right person for the job, and that Fred was actually right to call her, and admits that she's got some of her voodoo stuff burning a hole in her fanny pack, and tells the group that if there is indeed an evil spirit there, she's going to be able to help them find it. And sure enough, they immediately set up in Fred Sr.'s room on his bed, with Fred Sr. admitting that it's very impractical, pointing out that there must have been a better place to actually set up the seance. But Lady Marmalade insists that this is actually the best place to set up, because, as she points out, there is in fact this is in fact the epicenter of the haunting. So of course, if there's any sort of evil spirit in there, it would have to have been in the room somewhere. But and with that, she then proceeds to pull out an Ouija board with Shaggy and Scooby admitting that they know exactly what this is, and Shaggy immediately decides to pull it out and start asking a question, and he breaks several of the rules regarding how to use an Ouija board, by the way, or at least I think I don't think they're established rules. I just think they're rules that are like normally seen in like fictional stories where you have an Ouija board in them. You're supposed to not play them alone, and of course that's the first thing Shaggy does, and he immediately asks the Ouija board what their superhero names would be, and of course the two names are actually pretty epic, but they also apply to both of them, and Scooby immediately is curious as to which one is which. But it's at this point where Lady Marmalade scolds them and snaps up the Ouija board and tells them that the board is not a toy, and proceeds to, even though it is, but she then proceeds to set it up in the middle of the room, and she then proceeds to set it up in the middle of the circle, and proceeds to go into the typical seancing thing where you pretend to ask the Ouija board a question, and the Ouija board is just kind of supposed to respond to it, but of course she immediately afterwards she then proceeds to ask everybody if there's a question, everybody is immediately very skeptical about the whole thing, and Daphne is the only one to ask a question, but she doesn't really take it too seriously. She starts asking if anybody, if she was perhaps dealing. She very much implies that her whole thing would deal with Fred, but immediately Lady Marmalade immediately snaps it up, pointing out that if nobody has a serious question, she's going to leave. But Fred Sr. insists that nobody's going anywhere, and that she needs somebody to ask a question, he might as well, since he's the person that the ghost has been haunting. And of course, once she sets up the Ouija board again, he immediately asks what the spirit is and why it's attacking him. And it's at this point where the spirit board answers, "I am an old friend, and I want what you took from me." And of course, Fred Sr. immediately denies that the Ouija board is talking anything. But when Fred asks what it's talking about, and of course Fred Sr. adamantly denies it. But even calls the whole spiritual thing a bunch of poppycock. But it's at this point where the Ouija board actually winds up catching fire, and Lady Marmalade immediately points out that they've actually angered the evil spirits. And of course, this is this point where the house actually starts coming to life, and things start rotating and flying around the room, and of course Shaggy and Scooby point, and of course this is also this point where they start hearing the evil spirit whispering about how they want what they want back, and Shaggy and Scooby actually remark that it's a little bit messed up, and it's at this point where the gang starts to try and run out of the house, and are actually attacked by several pieces of furniture. Velma actually gets attacked by Fred Sr.'s bed, but she manages to get away from it. And at one point, a moose head, the moose head that they have in their main living room, actually winds up grabbing Daphne. But of course, this is this point where Fred actually shakes it off. And apparently, the moose's name is Tyler, according to Fred. When Daphne asks him how he knows the moose, he merely points out that he spends a lot of time alone, and sometimes he gets lonely. So, and points out that the moosehead is actually a really good listener, so he started naming it Tyler. And of course, is this point where everybody immediately proceeds to barge out of their house, and everybody manages to escape. But it's at this point where Fred points out that he doesn't know why the evil spirit why the shadowy figure is actually haunting Fred Sr. But whatever's in there, it does not like Fred Sr. But as he then proceeds to turn around, he notices that his dad is seemingly missing, and sure enough, he notices that his dad is actually being dragged in the house, and then the door slams behind him. Which of course causes Fred to immediately start panicking because he realizes his dad has been grabbed by the ghost and is likely in mortal terror. And it's at this point where Daphne asks Lady Marmalade if there's anything they can do. And Millie Marmalade confesses that that in a situation like this, there's only one thing they can do, and then she proceeds to run off. With Shaggy and Scooby finding the whole thing informative because she chalks it up as a voodoo technique. And they point out that they didn't realize that running away was actually a valid voodoo technique, so they're very impressed. But in any case, Fred, very very determined to get to his dad, and eventually runs off to go in the back door with the rest of the gang chasing after him. And it's at this point where they kind of freak out, where they kind of panic a little bit, and Fred actually wonders if they actually are going to be able to figure out what's going on with Fred Sr. and the shadowy figure. With Fred pointing out that he feels like he's failed and he's never going to be able to see his dad again. But it's at this point where Velma points out that they actually set up the cameras and that they could easily cue back to try and figure out what actually happened to Fred Sr. And of course, it's at this point where Fred, while she's actually queuing up the video, that Fred actually goes off to kind of sulk by himself, and Daphne actually winds up going to kind of console him, even remarking that she knows that hand holding isn't on the schedule, but she feels like he needs it right now, and of course Fred openly admits that he's realized that he's being a little bit too clingy with Daphne. He openly admits that, but while he's actually talking to her, he actually picks up a picture of his mom, which he then proceeds to confess that he knows from personal experience that's very easy to lose someone, and he doesn't want that to happen between him and Daphne. But with Daphne reassuring him that he actually is never going to lose her. But which is very sweet. It does cause Fred to calm down a little bit, but. It is at this point where Daphne calls the two of them over, remarking that she has indeed found the footage that they're looking for, and of course everybody immediately gathers around the cameras, and what we immediately find out is that Fred Sr. wasn't grabbed by a ghost. Apparently, he faked the whole thing and slammed the door behind himself, which causes Fred to become a little bit confused, pointing out that his dad wouldn't do that, and of course Velma immediately continues to follow him with the cameras, and what we found out is that he immediately, and this is where they find out that he has a piece of the Planet Spirit disc, by the way, but they do find out that he deliberately made it look like he was attacked by a ghost to go so that he can go and retrieve his piece of the Planet Spirit disc without the ghost knowing. And of course, it's at this point where they hear Fred Sr. let out a scream, with Fred pointing out that isn't in the cameras, but then Velma points out that it's actually a minute behind, and quickly realizes that there's actually likely a bit of a situation regarding that, and that he's likely in danger in real time. So Fred immediately runs up to the top floor to actually go and look for his dad, and can't find him in any of the rooms, and eventually realizes that his dad has been taken and is gone. So he quickly realizes that. Of course he's failed, and that he's likely not going to be able to find his dad. But Daphne actually reassures him that he hasn't failed and that they'll find him. At which point Velma leads Shaggy and Scooby in a clue hunt to actually see if they can find some clues. And they immediately go into Fred Sr.'s bedroom, and what they find is a pile of birdseed lying on the floor, with Fred pointing out that that's exactly what Fred Sr. said was happening, that he's been finding birdseed all over the house, and sure enough, he's been finding sunflower seeds and a couple of other things just lying around the house. But it's at this point, and of course, when Scooby continues to investigate, he eventually finds a contraption underneath Fred Sr.'s bed. After retrieving it and bringing it back to the rest of the group, Fred remarks that it's actually one of his traps, and looking more closely at it, he discovers that somebody had modified it to shoot fire, which kind of makes the rest of the group realize that whoever's doing this is actually jury-rigged several of Fred's traps, and then proceeds to wonder if that's what's actually causing the hauntings, and Fred points out that is indeed possibly what's going on, pointing out that he's actually set traps up all over the house, which does kind of explain some of the odd things. Well, not all of them, but some of the odd things. But not obviously there's an evil pizza, which it doesn't really get explained by that. But many of the things that are around, many of the furniture and stuff around the house is actually set up on the off chance that Fred needs to take care of an intruder who gets into his house. And when Velma proceeds to point out if it's possible somebody could have figured out how to control his traps, Fred then proceeds to point out that they'd have to outsmart him first, and of course they immediately point out that nobody actually comes to his defense, pointing out that implying that he's not all that smart, and truth be told, he isn't, but he then eventually confesses that if somebody were to actually hack into their laptop, hack into his laptop, they could control all the traps from there. But he does admit that they would have to actually be a genius, and realizing that she now has all the pieces together to actually figure out what's actually going on. Velma realizes that they now have everything they need to actually solve the mystery, and proceed to set up a trap. Having set up a booby trap that is supposed to drop multiple spikes down, that is designed. They actually jerry rig a tripwire, and also move around several of the bearskin rugs and a couple of other things that are in the house as well to kind of set up traps that way. And of course it's then proceed to make it look like they've actually abandoned the house. At which point the shadowy figure finally shows up. We finally see what it looks like at this final moment, and it immediately snatches up the piece of the planetary disc once it finds it. Pointing out that of course it points out that it's a little surprised Mr. Ink gave up that easily. At which point it then proceeds to go for the entrance to the house. Only to be surprised when the handles on the door actually start moving on their own. And sure enough, then there's a bear that just kind of roars at it, and then it winds up getting trapped by one of the bearskin rugs that stepped on, which causes it to panic, and it immediately tries to actually go, and immediately flees and tries to actually go into the living room, where it's once again attacked by another bearskin rug. And it tries to actually flee out of the, and it's this point where it actually tries to flee out of the fireplace, but Tyler actually winds up roaring at him. The little moose head just roars at him, and of course he immediately panics and goes up the stairs, where it sets off the tripwire, and then it's revealed that the tripwire actually sets off two spears that just impale its coat on the ground, and it's unable to move. At which point Mr. Ink finally comes out of hiding, revealing that they were actually dressed up as the bear that roared at him, and the two bearskin rugs that tried to scare him, as well as the moose head. And of course they then immediately confront him and reveal that it's actually Professor Pericles. And of course, Professor Pericles immediately admits that it was indeed him, but then wonders what actually gave him away. And sure enough, Velma then immediately points out that, of course, there's only one person smart enough other than her to actually figure this out, to actually figure out how to do something like this. And then also points out that there's also the fact that that he's been leaving discarded sesame seed shells all over the floor, which of course gave it away that it was indeed him. And sure enough, he then proceeds to point out that yes, it was indeed him, and then proceeds to explain how he did it, which is that he hacked into Fred's laptop, which in hindsight should have been a better password than Trappin' Guy, but yeah, that's Fred's password. It's just Trappin' Guy, and of course, Professor Pericles immediately figured out that was the password. But he then immediately points out that once he had the access to the laptop, it was easy to just rig all the traps to make it look like the house was haunted. And then because he could fly, he was able to just put on a large robe and then make it look like there was a large haunting figure flying around the house, which of course, since Professor Pericles is a bird, it works perfectly to make it look like he's flying. But of course, because he had to eat and couldn't stay in the house for extended periods of time without eating, it was his diet of birdseed that eventually gave him away. And of course, it's at this point where Fred asks Professor Pericles why he did all of it, and Professor Pericles confesses that he wanted the piece of planetary disc that Fred Sr. had, and when Fred is very confused, both mainly about the planetary disc, but also why Professor Pericles knew Fred Sr. had one. From Professor Pericles then proceeds to point out that apparently Fred Sr. stole it from him a long time ago, and points out that he's actually been trying to get it back ever since. And of course, and when Fred actually denies that his dad would actually do something like that, it's at this point where Professor Pericles asks him to ask for Fred Sr. himself, and then proceeds to immediately escape from the trap, since obviously it's just putting down his robe, and he's able to expertly escape from the robe because he's a bird. But he does proceed to escape and pulls out a remote that causes everybody to slide down the stairs and into the laundry room. And in the process, they actually drop the piece of the Planetary Disc, which Professor Pericles actually winds up snatching up, and points out that they should have expected the fact that he had a backup plan in case he got caught, and points out that now that he has the Planetary Disc, he's now satisfied, and proceeds to leave. And of course everybody lands on some mattress in the basement. And when Velma asks if he knew the trap was there, Fred then proceeds to point out that he has traps all over the house. So of course he may be forgetting a couple. So but in any case, they actually hear a moaning sound coming from underneath a blanket, and Shaggy immediately thinks it's another ghost, but of course Fred actually recognizes the grumbling coming from under the blanket, and immediately gets up to go and save his dad, and he actually is holding Daphne throughout this whole sequence, so he actually winds up dropping her on top of everybody else, much to her chagrin. And then immediately uncovers his dad tied up, but still very much okay in the basement, and of course Fred Sr. openly denies the fact that he's okay at all, since obviously he's tied up in the basement. But in case after Fred immediately frees his dad, the rest of the group then proceeds to point out that what actually happened, and proceed to point out that it was actually Professor Pericles who actually when Fred Sr. is very confused, is openly very concerned about the fact that Professor Pericles has been in his house. He then proceeds to wonder if Professor Pericles got his piece of the Planetary Disc, and Daphne admits that he did. And then the group then proceeds to ask Fred Sr. why he has it, and why Professor Pericles said he stole it from him. And Fred Sr. kind of remarks that the bird might be lying, and points out that he confiscated it when they locked him up, and has kept it on himself to actually kind of keep Professor Pericles from getting it, since he admits that might be the safest place. And of course the rest of the gang don't buy this, except for Fred, who immediately pulls his dad into a hug and is just happy that the mystery is solved. But the rest of the group then proceed to point out that maybe it isn't. And in case this is where the episode this is where things actually kind of get interesting. So obviously it seems like Fred Sr. is kind of lying about where he got the Planetary Disc, since he's been very shifty about that whole topic for the past couple of episodes now. But yeah, what is very interesting about is that apparently Professor Pericles and Fred Sr. know each other, which is a very interesting thing. But also because they know each other, it's specifically because of that Professor Pericles proceeded to call him an old friend, which I am very interested to know what kind of story that is there. How do they know each other? Obviously, Fred Sr. admits that he had Professor Pericles locked up in the animal asylum for the criminally insane, but I think there's something deeper there. Obviously, Professor Pericles, and there's been some interesting things with Professor Pericles. He knows a couple of people. He's been having a couple of interesting reactions with a couple of people, and we do know that he actually has been causing problems behind the scenes. So yeah, there's definitely been some interesting things for Professor Pericles, and I do wonder what his grand plan is. But also, the fact that he seems to know Fred Sr. implies that there's some sort of deeper connection that Fred Sr. isn't talking about and is withholding from the rest of the group. So I am curious to see what that connection actually is, and we do have a couple more episodes in the season left to go, so I am interested to see when that's going to come out. But in any case, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Facebook, or rather on Twitter in the description below. I don't use Facebook much anymore, but yeah, if you want to, you can find it, but I don't use it. But in case, yeah, follow me on Twitter. The link is down in the description. And finally, and also be sure to check out my Patreon. Link is down in the description below as well. It does help support me, so be sure to go check this out. And there's a couple of different perks depending on how much you pledge to me a month. So just go check that out. But and finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one, 8 Merriman Happy this one, whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!